Jennifer Elise Foerster is the author of The Maybe Bird from Song Cave, Leaving Tulsa, and Bright Raft in the Afterweather. Both of those were published by the University of Arizona Press. She received her PhD in English and Literary Arts from the University of Denver, her MFA from the Vermont College of the Fine Arts, and is an alumna of the Institute of American Indian Arts. She is the recipient of an NEA Creative Writing Fellowship, a Lannan Foundation Writing Residency, and was a Robert Frost Fellow in Poetry at Breadloaf and a Wallace Stegner Fellow in Poetry at Stanford. She teaches in the IAIA Low Residency MFA Creative Writing Program. The Maybe Bird marks Jennifer Elise Foerster as a visionary voice in contemporary poetry. Through a spiraling sequence of lyric poems, a cast of voices, oracles, ghosts, water, speaks to a long history of genocide, displacement, and ecological devastation. The Maybe Bird was recently chosen as one of the best books to read this summer by Camille Dungy for Orion magazine. You will see why when you hear these wonderful poems. Please help me welcome Jennifer to the stage.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction and for inviting us all to be here today virtually with the Hudson Valley Writers Center. This is a great pleasure. This is only the second time I've read from the book since it came out. The other time was at Rainier Writers Workshop, where I was teaching last week. So this is exciting. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to read some poems from The Maybe Bird. The Maybe Bird started off as, I was actually doing some research for a PhD project, and I found myself reading all these journals from, agents and explorers to the southeast, where my Muskogee family is from, and finding myself really not sure what to do with this material. So I started playing around with the material, and long story, through all these things, I decided I needed a formula to write into in order to address material that was so confounding to me, a material where I found myself and my relatives and that history completely absent from the landscape. So I came up with a design that felt intuitive to me, and I wrote into that design. So I'm going to read from a few poems from this sequence. It's a 64-part sequence, and there's an intricate little pattern in it about what repeats and when and how it repeats. So you may hear some repeating lines, and each poem is titled with one of the repeating lines, but that's not really important. That's just the process behind it. So I'll read several of those. But feathers of discontent, kingfishers. Our beginning was covered in water, and all the animals spoke the same language. Panther tracked back and forth across the sky as long escarpments, nightfall and rock mouth. Buzzard grew tired and flapped his broad wings. The soil beneath him rippled into hills. Our threads unraveled. Spiders' reins returned. Beneath the surface of the floodwaters, the lost people rubbed their faces with earth, their rutted eyes resistant roads of grain. The only willing survivors, not ghosts, the planet's oldest organisms, but feathers of discontent, kingfishers drifting wind-struck over Earth's ancient vents. Sketched on their cities' chipped brass plates, our future's blinking archipelago. Wouldn't it be preferable to drown, victims of upper world explanation? There are no hard syllables in water. Our boat disappeared over the Earth's edge, and what we didn't see was paradise. 1 week away and the forest has changed. 1 week away and the forest has changed. The last version of myself is dying. My last awareness in the body, gauzy hands, incandescent willows, my face in the sediment, declining. Add a new blanket of earth to the mound, a hole in time's glove, tear in the sky. Rain blowers calling to oncoming clouds, crushed parenthetical shapes of grass, sublingual camouflaged lanterns. I envy the unborn, burned gowns, restless in the channel. All I've loved is a crane's song, half note in the flood, the lightness, language, marvelous thing, my silhouette, fossil of the drowned town's scroll. 1 week away and the forest has changed. 1 week away and the forest has changed, measured wind consistent in its image. First frost, day's ghost, chattering red-toothed leaves. I wander the groves of recycled thoughts, restless, navigating musty stacks past gravel tracks, those blushing fields of wheat, golden in autumn's sweep and blossom. For an instant, I turn back and notice how the glacier at first sight is static, how a train becomes a parabola in snow, how a swamp tupelo roots in our haze. To what can we return when we turn time toward sequence, when we reset the chain to prove our lives a miracle of flight? There have been 5 mass extinctions in our 400 billion year history and no memory of the formula for forgetting. What can we make of it but a hot air balloon? I wind the key and wait, suspended against the ruins. Add a new blanket of earth to the mound. Add a new blanket of earth to the mound. Sunflowers blooming from a trashy wash. Sumpweed, knotweed, pigweed, ragweed. Summer's signature, cenotaph, empty tomb. The evening veil, a partial reveal. Moon's eagle effigy, winged snake, eclipse of sun's primordial escape. I echo the aspen's crack and moan as winter curls about its throat to find precision's fitful guise and pine for lines where swerve the cold gray streams of lead. All lines that end undead, not callous, male or stacked, are rocks where crashed the Cyclops' head. Where sleep to moor like once my mastless boat in night's dense harbor, fishnets trawling stars. I envy the unborn, burned gowns. What lifted when I went through the gates? A rash of white marsh birds in the meadow, grassy clatter of antelope, echoes wreckage, charcoal teeth, city's unsheathed blade. How I envied the unborn, burned gowns gathered in shade, stems snapped, beheaded. It is nice to be dead like this from grace, the author of time's bewildering light, her omniscient, inflexible flowers. The lightness, language, marvelous thing. By blood, I encountered my formlessness, and Cossack netting the bone tender. I think there's someone with their mute button maybe not on. Okay. The lightness, language, marvelous thing. By blood, I encountered my formlessness, hips and Cossacks netting the bones tender. I was changing from within the deep vein, a natural death, evolution's echo, my swallows fleet, my looms blue-metered weft, impressed upon the murmuring river. I had been critical of the music, the lightness, language, marvelous thing, feathered match coat of Spanish origin, flame in my unfashionable closet. On my crown, I can still see the future. Be mindful, you said. Prepare for change. I changed the geological record without past romantic anxiety because I wanted to understand this moment in our history, seagulls hatching from my wrist in full sentences. Ashes, its leftover words in my mouth. The singers have fallen asleep in their cars, small camps smoldering. What they didn't sing, ashes, its leftover words in my mouth. Where are you going? The sun, the moon. Where did you come from? Warrior, star. Yet in my doubts I strain to hear the bubble of salt behind sand snails, the ocean pulling back into its mouth. What detritus the mind? I wade knee-deep in our stratum's mycelium, laced like splattered aluminum paint, a mat of leaves on the forest floor will receive our fall, we imagined. Before we were forced to leave, we charted the denser galaxies, trophied the antlers of 3 trillion trees to carry with us as a reminder of the history of the world's end people. There was no miracle, no other home. I look to the east, the fire roads. Marsh birds are lifting from the methane field. Dwarf white roses blooming in my suitcase. Just do a few more. I become the canyon, its dreaming eye. In the last days of my marriage to God, I descended their spiraled library, relentlessly navigating stacks of shell-tempered mortuary offerings, sandstone saws recovered from the caves. I lingered on history's worn stone steps to write these things, to recollect myself. What had I unburied, and what had I freed, and what is freedom from the human need to catalog and clock our porous loads? I gazed, eyes closed, at the moon's cratered walls. Spiders encircled me, spinning their silks, as I listened to the tuning suspension of the underground particle colliders vibrating between silence and motion. By midnight, saplings had sprouted from my hand. The clouds dissolved into semicolons, and I with them into a new language of branching gestures, airborne spores, from one infinitesimal thread, a pattern. It was my first act of disappearance. I would return before anyone noticed, poems to be found in the forest, not the mind. There's a canyon between this version of me and the shadow on the stairs that is mine. I became this canyon, its dreaming eye. I'll end with this one. What did it matter? Their names were flames. It is nice to be dead like this from grace. Glass door cracked open for a breeze. Crows unrolling October's paper curtain. A scroll across the meadow's lunar slopes for off-season aeriform alphabets. I want to lie down on the road and read the gold-fringed leaves of an autumn diction, yet stand between my two selves, paralyzed, accounting to do, cooking and email. Must write the girls to thank them for the wine, study the dictionary of angels. What does it matter? Their names are flames, and my mind hurts all night, terrorizing its survivors. Each thief of thought, a phantom word whose oculi stalk me through every eye. The crush of people at the departure terminal, pleading to their gods for the ship that never comes, still haunts me. Stripped of their belongings, they climbed, limb over limb, skywards, the words on their tongues no nearer the stars or the circling birds. A lighthouse beacon flashes through my window. The end for some is the body no longer being burdened to believe. For me, this is where I begin. I take up my pen in the frigid house, a pile of feathered bones at the door. Last year's bears asleep beneath the floorboards. And I'll end there. Thank you so much for listening to some of this sequence. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was really gorgeous. And I hope all of you will purchase these books today that you're hearing excerpts from. Sophia is putting all of the information for that in the chat. Thank you so much for having your second reading from your book with us at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. Suzanne Frischkorn is the author of Fixed Star, as well as the books Girl on a Bridge and Lit Window Pane, both from Main Street Bragg Press, and the chapbooks American Flamingo, Spring Tide, Red Paper Flower, Exhale, and The Tactile Sense. She is the recipient of many fellowships and awards, and her poems have been widely anthologized. Her work has been published by Copper Nickel, Ecotone, Indiana Review, the Los Angeles Review, North American Review, and Verse Daily, among others. She is an editor at Money, Poetry is Currency, and serves on the Terrain.org editorial board. Jackleg Press writes, Fixed Star is a brilliant treatise on violence, division, loss, longing, and the search for song. Pulitzer Prize winner Diane Seuss writes, Fixed Star cannot be reduced to anything other than itself. I am in genuine awe. Please help me welcome Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Jen, for that beautiful introduction and for bringing us all together here today. I'm so happy to be reading with Maider and Jennifer. That was a breathtaking, captivating reading. It really resonated with me as someone who lives in the forest. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to reading your book. I am reading from Fixed Star for the second time as well. And primarily, Fixed Star is a quest. It's a decades-long quest across various landscapes, seeking what's been stolen, retrieving what's been lost. And when I was writing these poems, I wanted to uncover the cost of assimilation and the experience of being both drawn to and exiled from one's heritage. I'm going to begin with two poems from the opening sonnet sequence. It's called Cuban Palomita. The Cuban palomitas are these beautiful snails with these gorgeous, colorful shells. But I think that's all you need to know in this poem. Cuban Palomita. Birth cleaved me in half. The sea I grew legs in, now a dissonance, a fixed star. The Atlantic where I summer cannot diminish the dichotomy. This figurine with its sash cinched by gold leaf, its delicate arm grafted with glue. It's the din of fiesta I hear on the boardwalk, that green button of memory, an earring tucked into an envelope, found in a bureau with the scarves. Found in a bureau with the scarves, an imprint of identity, a single gold ball stud, evidence of cultural piercing, a lace dress, a first language, all myths once we moved north. Washed on shore, we lost our heritage. Sometimes it happens when you're standing. Watch yourself. Perhaps it's as effortless as drifting. The soft light of a street lamp on a November morning, taking the edge off the stars. My body as a communist country. Its betrayal, totalitarian, skin dry as parchment, lit by the slightest brush. The scent in our sheet sets off chimes, a measure until you return. The minutes I swallow whole. Castro, you've nothing in Cuba like my desire. My body's capitalism, greedy. It's a slow jam in a darkened room, keeping time with the DJ. It's lyric, the blue light of aging, shadows, desires waking. 10 years from now, we'll wonder at this. My body's exacting power, brooking no opposition. What it means to be Cuban, hyphenated. It means I'm on a journey. Is the soil blood red or brick red? To witness miles of tobacco's green waves. Yes, I know, no yearning for the island, or talk about a mango tree in the backyard, Carol City. What about burrs in the grass pricking my feet? Graffiti? My Cuban sitter built a tiled shrine to Mary, my only mother. I sat at her feet for days. What it means to be Cuban, hyphenated? I don't know. My father's from Cuba. I'm American. He wanted me to learn one language really well. Nascent. The quest brought its own interstellar medium in the end. She was matter between stars in a galaxy of stars. The yoked constellations, capitalist and communist, rang bright on her skin. Fidel, is it cold in Cuba? She is nascent, still, because her body is here and she is not. A numinous zephyr lily of love, cloistral and cognizant, laminated to each star. Suzannita is but one stria here. The lathe is the sinew and the cloche, terracotta. Entiendo. The royal palms have closed up shop. These next two are also from Cuban Palomita. It's an odd form of capitalism. In the stands, the man with his hands on his hips and his head tilted back searches for answers. People, man, they love hurting people. Whatever these women do, like others, they want to see the world. The money change happened so fast, nobody had time to think. And while I could end there, I have no desire to. I need a history more complete. So I continue with my father's story, making up details as I go along. Making up details as I go along, I held my hands up to the generals. I walked around investigating the endless star, an empty net, the fish trapped inside the wind. The first night was wonderful, adrift amid the remnants. In the empty house, I hear the sea. The boats were manned by brothers, uncles, cousins, blood ties, a bond love can twist. All the years by the sea taught her every definition of blue. There was a lot of lechery and disorder, and I am queen on that island. In March of 2003, Normando Hernandez Gonzalez was among 75 Cuban journalists who were arrested in what became known as the Black Spring. And this next poem was found in interviews on his experiences. Black Spring. I held my breath under the bed, curled like a knot against the wall. They searched cars, they searched everywhere, searched everything. A small incandescent bulb lit 24 hours a day. I always talked. If I had the desire to speak, I spoke. My only sunlight hours, Monday through Friday at noon. All 7 of us remained in solidarity. We began our hunger strike on the 13th of August. They took everything, including the mattress from the bed. All they left me was my underwear. The cell was completely boarded up, a small crack at the top of the door. If I stood on 5 books, I could look out into the prison. There was not an inch of me without a mosquito bite, small red bumps on every part of my body. I never could sleep in that cell. To get through something like this, you think about your family. I believe that was my wife's saddest experience. She doesn't even like to speak of it, of when they let her see me. I didn't stand up when they did head counts. I wouldn't dress in prisoner's clothes. I never addressed any guard or official by rank. I was beaten with rubber sticks. In Cuba, even to breathe is illegal. To breathe. If you breathe the air and while taking it in, you don't praise the government, you are being unlawful. It's as if the sky and the earth are going to come together and crush you, and no one will notice it's happening. Leaving prison was like being born with experience. Everything I do is motivated by love. There are remnants that remain. I would like to forget, but unfortunately, I cannot forget. And this is how it is. This one is from Cuban Palomita as well. And I am queen on that island. I am and will always be a Mariana in combat. Dear Captain, with urgency, I am answering your note. Be assured, I repeat, we will strictly observe the truce. At that moment, we were all Cubans. This is what we call the war of the entire people. How are they going to defeat our people? How are they going to defeat our revolution? Each woman knows what to do. Exilio. Conch shell pink, This sky echoes an ocean, a song weighted with pearls and sea glass. Mercedes, what did you make of Miami? Did it taste like sunlight on your wrist? White mariposa, replaced by ribbon orchid. Jasmine, a scent of dreams. And flamenco, castanets cast on the ground. Your granddaughter will seek you in 100 mirrors. In Castile, in Cuba, she'll twine a history with silver thread. The ocean will rise up to whisper in her ear. Spanish. Speak its measured notes. Recall the year long in paper. The cargo ship's scent. A single rolling wave. The sailors. Tick them off your fingers. Melodious. Listen, you cannot even name his brothers and abuelas becomes a hymn. Mercedes, Mercedes, Mercedes. A song to weed the garden by. Mercedes. This is how we lose the language, how we lose ourselves to myth, to legend, and how you find me with regrets only. So there are actually two sonic coronas in the book, and I'm going to finish with the two from the corona in the second half of the book. These sonnet sequences are individually titled, though. Andalusia. A moment longer, it may not have rubbed off the bougainvillea stain, its wine blossom. Rough is the face of Serenia de Ron, and rough the sand that spills from your palm. Darker than expected, night over the Mediterranean Sea. Strange to you, these hot stars, white like mijas, and their scent as hard. Had you known, would you still complete the journey? No habla español. Habla inglés, por favor. ¿Qué hora es? Time. We are speaking of time. How long it takes a stain to set, a flower to blossom. More than a morning? The Acanto-inspired columns, and nothing you promise will coax the palomas to follow you home. I'm going to finish with a poem called Sevilla. Coax the palomas to follow you home with a 1-2 beat. Conga, as if the last moment had arrived. Your percussion pulse at its end. Rhythm gets you everywhere, your hips most. Flamenco staccato beat brands your skin. Sevilla dares the moon to dance with stars. The love letter hidden in your pocket from where the palm tree grows. Suzanita, read it again, smooth its creases. Guantanamera, Wajida Guantanamera, your navigator and your compass. Green, how I love you, green. Under the gypsy moon, things are looking at you and you cannot look at them.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was wonderful. And I love the way all three of you, your work will look unflinchingly at what needs to be seen. Thank you so much for that great reading. Maida Vang is the author of Yellow Rain from Grey Wolf Press, 2021, a finalist for the 2022 Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. and Afterland, Grey Wolf, 2017, winner of the First Book Award from the Academy of American Poets. Afterland was longlisted for the National Book Award in Poetry and was a finalist for the Kate Tufts Discovery Award. Yellow Rain was also a finalist for the Penn Volkner Award for Poetry, the LA Times Book Prize in Poetry, and the California Book Awards. The recipient of a Lannan Literary Fellowship, Meider's poetry has appeared in Tin House, the American Poetry Review, and Poetry, among other journals and anthologies. She teaches in the MFA program in creative writing at Fresno State. I have read Yellow Rain 3 times now, and each time I learned something new about the possibilities of what poetry can accomplish. This astonishing collection examines and challenges our received definitions of poetry and pushes hybrid writing that mixes research, journalism, memoir with narrative and lyric forms, creating a collection that gets closer to an emotional truth about trauma than if any one of these methods had been removed. I hope you will purchase all 3 of these collections from your local bookstores, because the sampling you will hear today does not give you the complete picture of what these books have achieved. Please help me welcome Meider.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I can't believe you read the book 3 times, which is which is the first that I've heard of. Well, first of all, I just want to thank the Hudson Valley Writers Center for having me. I want to thank Jennifer Franklin again for that introduction and for bringing us all together, and my fellow co-readers as well, and all of you for joining us on this day to share in some poetry. And it's just been remarkable to hear from Jennifer and from Suzanne's work as well, both of which have just blown me away as I've sat nervously waiting my turn and thinking about what I'm going to offer from my book too. So I will be reading from Yellow Rain, and for me, it's a book that took over a decade for me to really work on and for all of its pieces to come together. It's a book that reinvestigates the issue of yellow rain, which was a chemical biological weapon used against Hmong refugees when they were fleeing the jungles of Laos just after the US withdrawal from its wars in Vietnam and Laos. And what ended up happening was that when they arrived to the camps in Thailand, many Hmong refugees reported that there was this mysterious substance that would fall from the sky, that would fall from airplanes specifically, and it would land on their skin, on their clothing, on the vegetation around them, and it made them sick. And there were many cases of fatalities as well. And so as a result of this, the US government conducted what became a very confusing and massive 8-year investigation into whatever yellow rain was. Meanwhile, though, they were also pointing their finger and accusing the Soviets of doing this because this was all happening during the Cold War. And there were governments around the world conducting their own investigations into yellow rain. And so you can imagine that with something as important as this investigation was, there were a lot of people involved in trying to figure it out, from scientists to multiple government agencies, and even the media got involved in the whole spectacle that became yellow rain as well. And I think what I found out when I was doing my research and I was digging through declassified documents and trying to learn as much as I could about yellow rain, it sort of dawned upon me that one of the reasons why yellow rain, the investigation would eventually fail, was because most of the people who were involved in the investigation were politically motivated. And so because of these various political interests and agendas that were coming into play and wanting to see their ends be fulfilled in Yellow Rain, somehow the investigation ultimately failed. Over time, what happened was that the Hmong stories and the Hmong testimonies of Yellow Rain were consequently invalidated and dismissed. And so my book tries to challenge the dismissing of the Hmong allegations, while also pushing against the erasure of this history. And as a daughter of Hmong refugees, for me, I think this issue really bothered me, just because it was just, how could you just dismiss what was being said? And then again, finding out that so much of what led to the dismissing of the allegations was politically motivated, was part of the fuel that I needed to be able to write this book. So I'm going to start by reading a poem from the beginning. Guide for the Channeling. Toward a worn legacy of rain, I've been lost down every jungle path, adrift and senseless to split open a cascade of knowing. I've tried with all my limber to keen a credo of justice, shelter those who solace inside graves. I have been boiled in my bladed search, opening with questions of a deserted pain, to end with a cemented breath shattered into silk. This is where I am taking you, into a discarded vista, blowing forth a silent blaze. Here, in sunk villages of the disregarded, here, where even the dirt of the land cannot muster against the threat of air. Biomedical, vegetation, munitions unfound, every footprint incarnate, where highlands tangle their echoes to the land. A place, no matter how remote, will always be too near and too much a reminder of an expired war. Refugees not called as people only to be called the outcome of an event. We are venturing into swell beyond swelling of paperwork and protocol, slips of memo and routing, cable and classified meeting. Here's the talk. Biological weapon, yellow spots, apiary blame for decades to wane and cold filed. Believe me as a torch of this wandering that I have been digging within the origins of redaction. Believe where I am sending you. I have been shoveling upside down, and now my eyes stagger, my hands ache, my legs becoming hunter, my back a raging shadow. I have been gardening myself into this remembrance. Okay, so next poem I want to read is actually a poem broken down into multiple sections, and it sort of is a various case studies in escaping, in evacuation, and fleeing. Case studies in escape, post-1975. 1. Hmong village chief. 5 times your village was forced to roam, restless and uprooted by eyes of the regime, to settle in the Bandon Valley. Wise ones taken to seminar meant this was a land of rules. No farming in the lowlands, no contact with the locals, no hunting within the forest, no trade outside the settlement, no clinics, no schools, no elders to spirit lead. Monitored by 2 officials and a brigade, then it happened. First attack in 79, source saw a plane fly over and then saw yellow sugar on farm plants. Once more, December 1980, until no more withstanding. February 1981, permission granted to move the village once more. This time you broke free. 77 families to the Mekong, a 13-day walk. 2, assistant to a Red Hmong chief. How many passages did you offer to safety before you conceded you could not save the whole? You alongside the gatekeeper who ended up on your own side of the war, using his sway to free captives from communist prisons. The deep valley as the doorway he thrust open for all those Hmong on the move, hinting at the foremost route to pursue, forfeiting his role as a Red. Until the gas, 1978. No degree of begging to superiors came, no help for the ill. Second gas, June 1980. Too small to treat with opium were 8 babies thieved as a result. Lost blood through body orifices. Gatekeeper fled into the bush, seeking a signal if there is a plan to retake Laos. But there was no plan to balance what you had been. No kindle of a coup to shelter all the hazards you gave. 3, a former Hmong captain in the Royal Lao Army. You averted your fate in a cleansing camp. People never came back. If only you were quick as deer, atmospheric as bird, small as beetle to hide in the earth. 25 relatives gone to the gas, more had been forsaken without shield. Eating roots and grass for the last 6 months, children and old people who can no longer walk are abandoned in a cave in the forest. So one of the key aspects of the investigation was that a lot of the Hmong refugees, they gave up thousands of samples, of biomedical samples of blood, urine, whatever they could give. And then they also collected leaf samples and vegetation samples and twigs and sticks and rocks that they also handed over to the US government. And many of these samples were shipped to laboratories all over the world. And what's really unfortunate was that a lot of these refugees gave these samples with the hope that it would help in the investigation. But by the time they arrived to many of these laboratories, they had already degraded. And the government also at the time didn't really have the means to test to figure out what this was. And so this next poem explores the futility of that investigation, of the testing of these specimens and these samples. Authorization to depart ravaged homeland as biomedical sample. Flew you afar, piecemealed bits of spleen, liver, tissues of the second gut orphaned by the whole. Routed you in a vacutainer. Bangkok, Frankfurt delayed, Dulles, Fort Detrick, as if only born to serve in post-mortem. Detain offerings of cerebral shards to be juried under a lens. Flew you from the silken wilderness of your viscera, from all the vacated leftovers of yourself, sinews snipped, culled from the ribs in this mission of guilt for your unleaving. You've trekked far from the village, salvaged insides from you and other hundreds, sealed on letterhead, dispersed to the globe. Here at long last in these United States, you did not land a body. Only as a vial of blood were you registered, as urine did they label you, asylum. Sample M3582, victim 7 en route to London. Fluids of you granted fare to enter refugee airspace while ending away in hospital camp, stayed behind the sourced you and every else part. Sample M2582, victim 9, no weekend courier, ambiguously arriving. So stomach of laments, how could they not get you here somehow? Only drops relayed lab to lab to lab. Cargo of you quaking inside an ice chest. Okay, so I think I'm going to do maybe 2 more poems. So as the investigation continued and this the samples were being tested, there were instances too of finding toxin in these samples as well. There was a scientist out at the University of Minnesota who did test and find toxins in these samples. And then there was a whole other contingency of people who were part of the investigation who really, really, really wanted to make sure that yellow rain wasn't a chemical biological weapon. And again, they were motivated by political interests to want to say that, right? And so this group of people came up with a theory that this yellow rain was really just the feces of honeybees defecating en masse on the refugees as they were running through the forests. That was the theory, that it was just bee poop, right? And so blame it on the bees, why don't you, right? So this next poem is an ode to the bees. And it actually opens with an epigraph that is a letter to the editor. Allied with the bees. These people have been living in these areas for all their life, but they have never heard or experienced something like this before. Bees and honey are part of their life. They and their ancestors have traded honey for salt, clothes, and other goods for hundreds of years. Letter to the editor by S. Yang, Long Beach, April 6, 1984. Tell them, child, we have hiked these hills without shoes long enough to hunt alongside the bees, memorizing the bend, pulse of their voices when they go dream inside the trees. We have been crowned with syrup of their toils so that our syntax might awaken to know its full range, compassed to the north, pristine as a nomadic butterfly. Tell them, daughter, we watched as they buried their queen, folding her into cashmere of her wings before swarming the body toward a fire of stars. And for days, the forest keened a shadow lullaby, and for nights, we listened for the bees only to uncover the hurried hush of our own stranded feet, falling forgotten as collateral beings. Tell them, Mintai, we are not misled in our anguish. What happened to the bees also happened to us. And I'm going to close with the last part of a poem here. It's actually broken into multiple pages, but I'll just read the last part of it. Manifesto of a Drum. For as long as a Saula can flee, I have been brooding in my sleep, moving through a century of leaves. A voice out of scrying, a river shifting my ears. Some early mornings are left for listening to water tones lilting the banks of a primeval lake, but the lake has been lacquered into the stars, mirroring its clotted hand down to mine. What does it take to raise an answer from the grave? Quantify stillness of doubt through unmarked bodies becoming ciphers for loss. I gather sharpness of my burn beyond agony for an answer. It is not to know the shape of what happened, but to know it happened, it happened, it happened. Here I make my light to gaze the trail, then sing this rain threadbare into storm. If love is the sacrament of digging, then here I hold my found into fire. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much for that reading. And again, please, if you don't already have the books or you haven't pre-ordered Suzanne's book, please do so. You can see Maider's book has so many different forms in it, different documents, different kinds of poems. It's really a treatise on how to write a hybrid book. So please order those when you can. And we're going to have a brief Q&A now with the poets. So if you have questions, please type them in the chat. Thank you all for being here. You're such a great audience. we're so happy to have you with us to celebrate the last reading of the summer series. And we will save the chat for the three of you so you can see everyone who has commented on your work. And we'll send that to you tonight or tomorrow. Let's see, Sophia and I will take turns asking questions. I'll start with the one that we always ask our participants who read in our series, and that's about giving advice to our students who are right now in the process of putting together their own collections of poetry. And we love to hear from our readers about what advice you have in putting together a collection, in editing, anything that you learned from your teachers and from the process that you would like to share.
I could start. One thing I've noticed when I've spoken with poets who are putting together their first manuscript, especially, is the question of should I be creating, a narrative or like a book project? And many of us do kind of create a project where the book is focused on a research or a theme, but not all the time either. And sometimes for that collection, if you know that that's not what you're doing and what the poems are doing, then to really allow the poems to exist in conversation with one another, not thematically, but to exist in conversation with one another sonically, imagistically, to look for those small threads that might kind of shimmer between poems, and use that as a way to kind of determine what poems to include and in what order and what pattern, and to kind of ask yourself, do I want this book to be focused in this idea, or is this really a book that's a collection of many songs, and then work from there.
I'd like to, after they do what Jennifer suggested, which is excellent advice, they're not going to want to hear this because everybody is so anxious to get that first book published. But I have found that time is my best friend. The longer I leave it to sit after I do what Jennifer said, and I let it compost, and I mean a long time, okay? So I forget all about it and I can come back objectively and look at it, and no one wants to hear that, but I have to tell you from experience, that is really the best way to be able to come back and look at it when you're detached, when you're already kind of working on something else already and have moved on from those poems. It's so much, it'll help you so much to be an editor to the other ones, the ones that you put to, that you wanted that first book for. Sorry.
I think that's all great advice. I would agree with what Suzanne and Jennifer shared. And I would just add, just do it. Just make sure you do it. Because I think we can come up with excuses for why we don't want to put together a collection, or we don't have time, or it's like it's not coming together. And so I think that some great advice would just be to like really just go for it and try it. And one thing that when I'm working with students on how to put together these collections, and they're thinking about those threads, or thinking about possible structural approaches, I always come back to this question of, in which I ask them and I ask myself when I'm writing my books, what are the poems you want to read? Write the poems that you want to bring into existence. What are the books that you wish you could read, right? And that begins to help them like think about putting together their collection in terms of bringing something into existence that isn't already there, but that is the work of assembling something, right? So yeah, it's just really great advice from Suzanne and Jennifer.
Yeah, that was really thoughtful advice from all three of you. Thank you. We got a question in the chat from Amy Holman, who wants to ask Suzanne, how does the Crown of Sonnets help with your voice as a poet?
My voice.
Your voice.
My voice. The sonnet is my favorite received form. And one of the things I'm inclined to write, I were always inclined to write in a certain way, is short, very tight lyrics. And in this book, I really wanted to break out of that. And I wanted to write longer poems. And the sonnet really helped me. The sonnet coronas really helped me do that, you know, focus on a larger theme without completely feeling like I was losing my footing. And then I did 2 of them. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I love how jumping off from the last line to, it felt like a play to me, which is something that's really important for me to create new work. It was fun and surprising, and I enjoyed it. So it helped me to break out and try something new. So thanks for the question, Amy. So good to see you.
I'd like to extend a similar question to Maida and to Jennifer as well, which is just how did form affect your sense of voice, or your sense of maybe breaking out of your routine, or some sense of structure along the process of writing your most recent books?
Well, I think in my case with form, I think I definitely tried things that I hadn't done before, things that kind of scared me a little bit, things that made me nervous about how I would react, or how, I know we're not supposed to be worried about how our readers are going to react, but, there's a part of you that's like, well, I don't know if anyone's even going to understand what I'm trying to say. So there was a lot of anxiety around trying to explore something that was, was a little different for me. But I think that's what helps us grow and transform, right? As writers, as poets, as artists, is that willingness to take those creative risks and to leap outside of our own familiarity, so that way we can explore the potential of what forms are available to us. So in this collection, I just kind of went, I went all out in some ways with some of the composition pieces that are sort of collaging all the different voices that were part of the debate on Yellow Rain, because I had to find a way to integrate them, but also not inundate at the same time. I wanted to sort of keep that poetic voice going through the collection. So the collages and the composition pieces were a way for me to do that and to really experiment and try something different, try something that surprised me about what I could do, other beyond the language, what I could do with form.
Yeah, I appreciate that, the presence inviting in surprise to the work. That's really how this project that I did, the sequence poem started, was I just needed to to shock myself into something. And so I came up with, and also what Suzanne said about fun, I was dealing with really difficult emotional material, and I wanted something like a structure that I could fit myself in, and a game where I could take my mind off the emotion and try to make this thing fit here. And so I created an elaborate design that just felt kind of, in my mind, I thought, that's crazy, I can't possibly do that. I thought, well, it'll keep me busy. And I was at a residency for 2 weeks, and in a beautiful place. It was the Hermitage Artists Retreat in Florida. And it was like, this is something I'm going to give myself a time frame. What can I do in 2 weeks with this structure? So I had all these parameters, and that really helped, because I think I hadn't been writing in a while, and I needed those restrictions in a way to become creative.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all so much for those thoughtful answers to Amy's question. along those same lines, it seems as though each of you used research in these books. And I was hoping that you could spend a few minutes talking to us a little bit about your approach to using research.
Is it my turn? Should I go first? I ended up, because I had been so cut off from, there's a lot of backstory that I won't go into, but I was very cut off from my heritage, and I had to do the research to learn more about, where I came from. So I read a lot of books. I read about Spain. I read about Cuba. I read about the history of Cuba and the United States, which is a long one. I traveled. I went to Spain. I wasn't able to go to Cuba at the time I was writing the book because of the embargo. So all of that, I read Cuban memoirs. I just basically immersed myself. I was listening to Cuban music. I really went all in, deep immersion, like an actor, a method actor or something. I just wanted to know everything. And there was a lot I left out, but it was very helpful to me when making the poems. I didn't really, I don't always know when I'm actually making a book or a project. I'm just following a thread, so. But I know a lot if you want to talk about it.
I have something just really short, that I think the active research is important for me, even if I don't know what I'm researching, but I just choose something and go for it. Because the more I seek externally, the more I get outside of myself. And I find that those things outside of myself are actually important to what's inside myself. But if, sometimes if otherwise I'm thinking about a poem and its interiority, and I stay kind of, I mentioned before, the emotion, too, kind of drowning in my own emotion about something. And I don't feel that that's very generative for me with writing. But when I start going outwards and researching anything, a plant, a history, something I'm drawn to, it just expands the language that we can use and the perspectives. I think it's something that poets can do. It's a kind of innate to poetry, I think. You can be a poet and be a scientist and a historian and, all these things. It just enriches how we're connected to everything.
Oh, I really love that, Jennifer, because I would absolutely agree with you on that. Because I find that my poetry is richer if I'm allowing myself to learn other disciplines, right? If I'm studying astronomy and trying to become, someone who knows anything about the planets and the stars, or if I'm, learning, plants and wildlife, right? That's birds, even that's a big one for me. So I think that when we think about research as part of our work and writing, it's we can think of it sort of like formal research that we're doing, right? Formal research means we're looking up stuff and we're using sources. But then I think we're always researching, in our everyday activities, learning something new, picking up something, hearing something, and that can influence the work that we're doing as well. So be open to like multiple kinds of research that might come your way. When you're in a creative space wanting to write. I think with me for this book, it was a lot of formal research in the sense that I dug through multiple databases online. I sifted around the State Department, the CIA's database, the National Security Archive I went to in Washington, D.C., which is at George Washington University, and they have a really great public space where people can go and dig through files and old boxes from like the Cold War, just these relics, right, of items, and that was really helpful to actually touch some of these materials too. So I think it just, the research can take you wherever it goes. It'll surprise you, maybe, you'll probably land somewhere you didn't expect to land, and that's always a great thing. And I guess the last thing I'd say too is that don't be afraid to follow the threads. The thing about research is that you're supposed to follow the tangents. Whereas sometimes when we're working with, we've got to stay focused, right? You can only do one thing. But what I love about research is that we're allowed to go off topic and follow the threads of where, okay, this takes me there. Okay, now that's going to take me over there. And that led me here. And so be willing to kind of go off topic with research, or like, I guess, off the beaten path with where the research takes you.
I love the way all three of you have articulated both formal research and this general openness and observation in the everyday as crucial nourishment for your poetry writing. I think you all put that so nicely. So I think the last question that we have time for, something that I think our audience members and Jennifer and I are always curious about. What are you reading right now? Whether it's poetry or whether you're following some other thread, what has your attention?
Well, right now I'm reading a lot of poetry because I'm, preparing for some teaching this year, and I like to just see what's new, and also trying to curate lists for people I work with who might be saying, what should I read? What do you think would help me? So I'm reading and going through a lot of books, which also means many visits to the library because it's like I can't buy everything I want to read. So thank goodness for the library to really be able to explore and, find out what's there. But I've also started reading a few novels, and I'm so grateful for these novels because I'm loving it. I'm like, why haven't I read? I mean, I just haven't been reading novels as frequently in the last year, and I'm so immersed in these two that I just like can't wait to sit down and open them again. So yeah. So I'm reading two great novels right now. One, I could just say what they are. One is Lydia Yuknovich's Thrust, and the other is Sequoia Nagamatsu, How High We Go in the Dark. And they're both excellent.
I am on an essay kick. I've been reading To the River, A Journey Beneath the Surface by Olivia Lane. I'm not sure how you pronounce her name. Laing. Someone had gotten me her book about art for my birthday, and I loved it so much that I started seeking her out, and I read her book on loneliness. And then now I'm on this one. I love the way she writes. I'm like underlining everything. I'm very entranced with her. I also just recently read Codependency by Amy Long. And I am reading a ton of stuff for the Seeley Challenge, which I love doing. I just finished The Queen of Queens by Jen Martelli, which was wonderful. And I just love being able to like dedicate some of my day. I don't think I do it the right way. I don't read like all the full book sometimes, but I like being able to say, hey, I'm supposed to be reading poetry every day this week. So it gets my reading to be read piled down, and I read all the time. So
yeah, I'm in between a lot of books right now in my life, and multiple genres too. But I have read a lot of poetry this summer, but also a lot of essays too. So I've been doing a lot of nonfiction. I just finished Angela Ejiko's The Magical Language of Others, which was beautiful, and Brandon Shimoda's book as well, and Alexander Chi. So quite a few essayists there. But I've also been reading things that are like completely not related to literature, like stuff about tarot and and just things that have nothing to do with. And I love that. I love reading reference books. Weird as that may sound, but just like right. Guide to Wildflowers, right? So just being able to do stuff that isn't even poetry related is great sometimes.
That's great. And thanks for bringing in the silly challenge to the discussion. We're all trying to do that as well. And don't forget that there's a 30% discount for SHP chapbooks on the Hudson Valley Writer Center website. So if you're looking for short chapbooks to add to the silly challenge, you can check that out. Leila Shati and Dorian Lau is our most recent conversation chapbook. It's called The Mothers.
I've
So
been
if you don't
reading
have that one, you might
Ex-
want to add.
Beautiful. That is that one's really good.
And there's also a great recent one by Toy Darracott and John Lundy Martin, and Ellen Bass will be the next one. We don't have a publication date yet, but that will be soon. Thank you all so much for being here today, and thank you for letting us record the reading. Thank you to our audience. You're such a great audience always. You always have great appreciation and wonderful questions for our poets. Again, Sophia is going to put the information in the chat about how you can order these wonderful books. And thank you again for taking your Sunday afternoon this summer to be here with us to celebrate poetry. Thank you so much, and congratulations to all of you on this wonderful work that you've accomplished.
Thank you. It was really lovely to read with both of you, and I'm going to get both of your books. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was really wonderful.
And of course, if I know you're all busy, but if you have time to teach a one-day class for us, we're always looking for new teachers to join us and to teach intensive. So we would love to have the three of you teach something. So we'll be in touch and we'll send you the chat. And thank you so much to everyone in the audience for being a part of this today. We really appreciate all of you. Please come back September 14th for our launch with Chen Chen, David Baker, and Kathy Fagan. And please zoom in to our gala if you can't attend in person on September 22nd, when we welcome Arthur Z. and Lauren Akampora. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.